developments in the Scott Peterson case. The California man was convicted in 2004 of killing his wife and unborn child, but now the LA Innocence Project is taking up his case, saying his innocence claim is supported by newly discovered evidence. Dan Abrams is standing by to break it down. Let's start with Kana Whitworth in Los Angeles. Good morning, Kana.
Hey, George, good morning. So in terms of that new evidence, the Innocence Project also says that it raises a lot of questions about who abducted and killed Laci and that Peterson's rights were violated.
This morning, a shocking turn in the case against Scott Peterson, the man convicted of killing his pregnant wife Laci and their unborn child in 2002.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Scott Lee Peterson, guilty of the crime.
The Los Angeles Innocence Project filing a motion stating evidence has been discovered that points to Mr. Peterson's innocence and points to the actual perpetrators of the crimes against Laci and Connor Peterson. The motion claims witnesses who saw Laci the morning she went missing were not properly interviewed and that a burglary right near the Peterson home around the same time was not fully investigated. They also want more DNA testing of a burned-out van found a mile away. Peterson's trial attorney, Mark Garagos, remembers arguing the case.
There were unbelievable amount of leads and pieces of evidence that pointed everywhere but Scott.
Now 51 years old, Scott Peterson is currently serving a life sentence.
We, the jury, made a decision based on a set of facts. In the end, all agreed on one thing. Scott Peterson was guilty of having murdered his wife and unborn child.
Laci was 8 months pregnant when she went missing over 2 decades ago on Christmas Eve.
We'll be giving birth real soon. We need to bring him home, and I think that's the best way that we can do it all.
Peterson sat down with our Diane Sawyer a month after Laci's disappearance.
Everybody sitting at home wants the answer to the same question. Did you murder your wife?
No, I did not. And I had absolutely nothing to do with her disappearance.
Suspicion mounted as details of an affair surfaced. The woman, Amber Fry.
Scott told me he was not married. We did have a romantic relationship.
Peterson was arrested in April of 2003, on the same day the bodies of his wife and unborn son were identified. He maintains his innocence, claiming his wife disappeared while he was out fishing.
This is a miscarriage of justice. I do not think that the jury got it right. I think this prosecution was flawed from the beginning.
Also this morning, the Modesto, California fire investigator telling the Innocence Project that he has been deeply troubled by what he views as an insufficient investigation into the possibility that that burned van was related in some way to the disappearance of Laci. George.
Okay, Kana, thanks. Let's bring in our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams. Dan, you logged an awful lot of hours covering this trial. How surprising was this?
I was stunned that the Innocence Project is taking this. Now, the Innocence Project does some very good, important work on behalf of people who are actually innocent, right? Not technical violations, people who have been wrongly convicted. In this case, there was an enormous amount of evidence against Scott Peterson. What they're ignoring here is the evidence that was actually presented against him. The fact that the body was found exactly where he said he was fishing, 90 miles away from his home. That his girlfriend had him on tape admitting that he had said his wife was gone before she died. The fact that Scott Peterson gave different accounts of where he was either golfing or fishing, depending on who he talked to, on Christmas Eve with his 8.5-month pregnant wife supposedly at home. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of the evidence against Scott Peterson that this motion doesn't really address.
This evidence may bolster alternate theories for the defense, but it doesn't weaken the evidence against him.
Right. And look, all these issues were raised during the trial, right? This idea of a burglary that happened across the street. Real issue, right? Had to be investigated. Happened either on the day of, the day after. It matters between the two. That was something the defense tried to raise as reasonable doubt. Jury didn't accept it. Eyewitnesses who claimed that they saw someone who looked like Laci after the time Scott Peterson had already left the house. Again, something else that was rejected. They got tons of tips at the time. Some of them from crackpots, some of them real. A lot of them were investigated, but none of them changed the evidence against Scott Peterson.
So what happens next?
So look, the question now is going to be, do they even get a hearing on this, right? I mean, look, this case is 18 years old. You don't automatically get new trial and new evidence and new testing 18 years later. They're going to have to demonstrate that they have a real chance of proving his innocence. I think that's a long shot. Is it possible that they'll get a hearing on this? Maybe. Is it possible they'll get a new trial on this? I think almost impossible. But you never know.
Danny Abrams, thanks very much.
A News Nation reporter who's been covering the Scott Peterson case since day one, okay? Now, you remember him, right? Convicted of murdering and dumping his pregnant wife. She has now returned to the scene of the crime. Why? To investigate a crucial lead. Peterson's appellate lawyers say this could prove that he's innocent. Remember, not, you didn't do it right, not guilty. Meaning, he didn't do it, it was someone else. What is it? A burned out orange van. So, what do we know? Who owned it? Who was it registered to? Who set it on fire? Why? Was it a cover-up? And why was all of this never disclosed to Peterson's attorneys on trial? News Nation correspondent Laura Ingle joins us outside the Modesto Police Department, and we also have Mark Aragos, Scott Peterson's first attorney. Thank you for being with us. What do you like, getting Chinese food? Well, I don't have time for that. So, Laura, what do we need to know?
Well, we've heard about this burned out orange van, and because, as you mentioned, I'm one of the many reporters who covered this 20 years ago, I had never heard of it, and I wanted to see exactly where it was in relation to Scott and Laci Peterson's home in Modesto. They live on a really nice street that does have a park that's known to have some transients and some activity there. But what we did was we took a drive. It's just over an hour, just over a mile away from the Petersons' home, this alley. And we've seen the pictures of the van, and there's a structure there. And at first, when I saw those pictures, I thought, okay, that was the alley. No, that's not the alley. It is a dirt road in between two streets in what's known as the Airport District. This is not a good area of town. It is known for gang activity, drug dealing, auto theft. There's a lot going on. So this is where the orange van was found December 25th, 2002, the morning after Laci Peterson is reported missing. It is torched. It's got gas cans inside. And then it was towed away. It was towed to a yard. Then it was later towed here to Modesto Police to a warehouse where they did take a look at it. So we wanted to get kind of our feet on the ground and see where this exactly was, because it's really close to Scott and Laci's home, Chris.
So criminals had access to the van because the trucking company allowed employees to have access to the van. But what did you learn about who it was registered to and why this apparently happened, and if there was any reason to suspect it could have had something to do with the Peterson situation?
Right, so we look into who this is registered to. It was to a guy, Terry Borden, and he owned a company named Borden & Sons Crane and Rigging. It's a company that's no longer around, but it is a yard where there's a lot of trucks. And Terry Borden was questioned about this van, who had access to it, and he said that his employees always had access to vehicles. He believed that that vehicle was stolen, and then there was a guy who he said was the last person to have access, this guy named Bobby Riggs. That was his second name. It was also Robert Smith, a.k.a. Bobby Riggs. But he said, yeah, I borrowed the van. I put it back at my boss's place on December 27th. Well, by that time, it had already been found burned out and had been towed here. So we knew that that wasn't true. So it's a very interesting twist here. And of course, because you've got this charred out back of the van that has a mattress that has what looks like blood stains and was tested for blood, you know, it's a huge question. And the fire investigator that has made all of this public in the LA Innocence Project documents did talk about going over to look at the van with Modesto Police and said that they took a look at it. And once people realized that there was blood, everybody came. The city attorney, the chief, everybody went and looked at this van. Evidence was taken. It was turned over to the DOJ, the Department of Justice, but we don't know exactly what happened next. And to your point, who got these reports? Was it Mark Garagos? Was it Peterson's defense team? It doesn't sound like it. And that is what the LA Innocence Project is looking at, because that van, or the The part that you see where there's blood, there was a gas canister that was on top of it, and then when they pulled the gas canister off, that's why that area of the mattress is a little untouched. It's not all the way charred, and they've in that circle. That's right.
Laura Ingle, this is some good, enterprising journalism. Thank you very much for doing it for us. Mark Garagos, Bobby Riggs, you know, you're thinking, who's that? The one who played against Billie Jean King? You never heard of this guy's name. You were never given this information. Should you have?
Yeah, and it's frustrating because we spent weeks doing hearings on mitochondrial DNA because Modesto PD wanted to use a hair that was found, and they wanted to use the mitochondrial DNA. At the same time, they were delivering all kinds of stuff to the Department of Justice. It wouldn't have been very difficult in the least to have cross-checked all this stuff, because the very same department and lab was doing all kinds of testing at the same time. And so the frustration level is off the charts for me.
Hey.
Check in with Geraldo Rivera, veteran award-winning journalist who was long the dean of covering crime. His show, Rivera Live, was the crime show in America at the time. When I got to fill in on Rivera Live, it was like the highlight of my career at the time. Ashley Banfield is with us, host of Banfield on News Nation, who, of course, has become one of the leading crime reporters in addition to anchoring her show, and Jesse Weber. He's an attorney and anchor for the Law and Crime Network. He follows all of these stories closely, also a News Nation legal contributor. All right, Geraldo, let me get your first thoughts on this motion and the fact that the LA Innocence Project has taken the case.
You know, that is the shocking thing to me, why this otherwise very reputable organization would stoop to take a case from a person who is so obviously guilty. In the litany of you know, him saying he's golfing and he's really fishing and all the rest that you recited, Dan, one other thing is, remember, he was caught on the Mexican border with dyed hair and $15,000 in cash, heading for parts south. You know, a reverse commute, so to speak, in terms of the what's going on. So there is Scott Peterson, this skunk, this you know, a lion dog, trying to put it on a burglary across the street that was thoroughly investigated. I don't see how does he get witnesses, photos, videos, new DNA, all of which was available to Mark Garagos at the time. Now he's trying to relitigate a case that was a slam dunk. There's a good reason he was condemned to die. This heartless person kills his pregnant wife. President Bush passing a law declaring that a fetus is a person, and at least insofar as a murder trial is concerned. So there he goes. He's sentenced to die, San Quentin prison, living a cushy life, pumping iron, playing basketball, and now he has these great attorneys in his corner trying to raise hell.
Ashley, let me read you from the court filing, all right? Because one of the things they say is that new evidence, right? The key is the new evidence shows Laci was abducted but not killed on December 24th, 2002. On December 28th, 2002, they say eyewitness Tom Harshman, this is number 5, reported to police that he'd just seen a pregnant woman fitting Laci Peterson's description being pushed into a van earlier that day, just north of La Loma Park. 2 witnesses reported that a man referred to here in his DM had confessed to them that he took part in Laci's abduction, which happened because she caught DM and others burglarizing the Medina's home, and they had to shut her up. So they killed her and took her body and dumped it at the place where Scott Peterson went fishing, which they had heard about on the news. That is sort of the heart of the defense's theory here, Ashley.
Yeah, listen, I think it's a really good thing for Scott Peterson that he had his death penalty commuted, except it ended up being a really bad thing for Scott Peterson, because suddenly all the money that you get to fight your automatic death penalty appeals disappears. So now suddenly Scott Peterson has to pay for all of this. Anything he wants to do to fight where he's at in that, as Geraldo says, cushy San Quentin setup, he has to pay for that. So it's a really good thing, again, that the Innocence Project stepped in, because last I checked, you don't have to pay for it. But I see your point. I see your point. There is a lot of evidence that Geraldo pointed out that it looks like a slam dunk, you know, obviously for Scott Peterson. But if you look at all the things that were omitted, it does start to look like there's a scintilla, just a scintilla of reasonable doubt. And as you all know, that is what you need in a case, is a little hint of reasonable doubt. And we all know, OJ, you don't even need to be too reasonable.
Except that now the trial was 18 years ago, right? I mean, you can't start relitigating the whole trial. Let me actually play you. I had one of the original detectives on the case on my show last night, John Bueller. And he addressed this specific question about the burglary. Let's listen.
The burglars were cleared, of course, from involvement with Laci. We could never find any clear connection between them and Laci. Property from not only that burglary was all recovered, along with property from unrelated burglaries. And in addition to that, we had a large reward in effect during this case, which grew to $500,000. And to think that anybody who was involved in the disappearance of Laci wouldn't roll on one of their cohorts to collect that money is kind of a fantasy for me. I welcome them to DNA test more evidence. Feel free to do it. I have no doubt we got the right guy.
Jesse Weber, I mean, the new evidence just seems to be additional people who have come forward in some way, shape, or form. The Innocence Project saying in one of the points in the filing, oh, you know, we're having a lot of trouble getting people to talk to us. Well, that's not enough 18 years later.
Couple things. Before we even get into that, you buried the lead. Not only an all-star panel, great hair panel. I was looking at this, I was getting distracted for a second. But anyway, to your point, look, this is 18 years later. I mean, look at this, it's fantastic. But 18 years later, DNA has changed.
In the Scott Peterson case. This morning, a former California fire official who says key evidence wasn't properly investigated is speaking exclusively at ABC News for the first time since the Los Angeles Innocence Project took on the case. Kana Whitworth is in LA with the story. Good morning, Kana.
George, good morning to you. Brian Spitulski led the investigation into that burned van near the Peterson home, and he tells me that he was shocked that he never heard from the prosecution or the defense at the time of the trial. And now the LA Innocence Project claims that the evidence was never disclosed to the defense, and now they want it revisited.
This morning, an ABC News exclusive. A former fire investigator speaking for the first time since that bombshell filing in the Scott Peterson case about the potential of new evidence.
This has always been one of those things that kind of sits in the back of your head and kind of bugs you a little bit, and you kind of wonder why this didn't happen or why it wasn't brought up.
Nearly 2 decades after Scott Peterson was convicted of murdering his pregnant wife, Laci, the Los Angeles Innocence Project demanding the case be reevaluated, largely hinging on information from then Modesto fire investigator Brian Spitulski. Spitulski investigating this burned-out van found the morning after Laci disappeared in December 2002, located less than a mile from the Peterson home. Lawyers from the Los Angeles Innocence Project now zeroing in on evidence from a mattress in the back of that van with a red and brown stain on it.
You have this woman, she's 8 months pregnant, she's missing, this van is of high interest, and now a sample from a mattress on that van has tested presumptive positive for blood. What were you thinking in that moment?
You know, I don't know that I was tying the moment to Laci. I was more tying the moment that it was human blood. It made it like this was much more important than just a burned vehicle that somebody was just wanting to get rid of or cover up a simple crime.
In a court filing, lawyers say DNA testing done on a small portion of that mattress several years later was insufficient to determine whether DNA from Laci or their unborn son was present.
You feel strongly that this evidence should be reassessed?
Absolutely, especially if we've got sample that can still be tested.
Laci's disappearance captivated the country, suspicion against Scott already mounting when his then-girlfriend, Amber Fry, came forward about their affair. Prosecutors later arguing Scott's motive for killing Laci was for a $250,000 life insurance policy. A jury siding with the prosecution in 2004, convicting Scott of first-degree murder for the death of Laci and second-degree murder for the death of their unborn son, Connor.
I don't have an agenda or an opinion on his guilt or his innocence. This is, for me, it's a fire investigation in a vehicle that has blood, possible blood, on the mattress. And that right there is important.
Former ABC News investigative producer Mike Gudgel has followed the case from the beginning.
I think it's still a mystery. The trial verdict was sort of unsatisfactory. It didn't say what really happened to Laci. And I think even the prosecution conceded that during the trial.
Brian Spitulski now works as a private fire investigator, but says the case has left a mark on him.
Is this the one that sometimes keeps you up at night?
Absolutely.
Now, the Stanislaus District Attorney told us in a statement, in part, that Peterson's conviction was upheld as recently as 2022, adding they can't comment further as litigation is pending. But you guys, the LA Innocence Project says that sensitive testing today could provide more information.
Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back. Another episode of Greenlit Gang TV. Appreciate you guys checking out the video. Thank you guys for continuing to check out the channel and the content. Today we're going to be covering an infamous convicted murderer by the name of Scott Peterson, whose murder case in the early 2000s made headlines all over the world. Ultimately, Scott was convicted first-degree murder of his wife, Laci Peterson, and second-degree murder of his unborn son, Connor Peterson. Scott Lee Peterson was born October 24th, 1972 in San Diego, California. From everything I read, he had a normal, good upbringing. Parents Lee and Jackie Peterson, good family, good friends, great in school, liked sports, was an avid golfer, had other half-siblings from his parents' previous relationships. Ended up going off to college, majored in agricultural business. He ended up becoming a fertilizer salesman. Met Laci while off at college working in a restaurant. From what I watched, he was a waiter. She came in with a friend. They met, they hit it off. And you fast forward August 9th, 1997, they end up getting married. They were married for about 5 years until Laci's disappearance and death, which began on December 24th, 2002. They're living the all-American lifestyle. They're living the dream. They have a golden retriever named Mackenzie, expecting the birth of their first child, Connor. And remember, at the time of her disappearance, she was 8.5 months pregnant. She was so close to giving birth to that baby boy. It's really very sad. You can see in the pictures, they seem happy. Laci's got this big, beautiful smile. Short, she's short, she's cute. Scott's this taller guy, good-looking guy. Seemed like a kind of a perfect fit. They went well together. But like they say, you just never know what's going on behind closed doors. You never know what your neighbors are up to, or what people are really going through. And I think a case like this speaks to that. I think a case like this, and when you see people like this is why the public is so infatuated with true crime. I'm crazy into this story, because it's not what you expect. These are why cases like this, Scott Peterson's case, gripped the nation. I'm telling you. There were careers made. When I say careers made, I mean Nancy Grace in particular. Her coverage of Scott Peterson kind of sent her to the next level. And if you don't believe me, just go YouTube. YouTube Nancy Grace Scott Peterson, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It was pretty crazy. In this particular case, I would say the media, whether you believed he was guilty or not, you're still supposed to have the right to a fair trial. You're still supposed to be presumed innocent until proven guilty by a jury of your peers, and the prosecution is supposed to prove that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense is not supposed to prove that you're not guilty. It's the prosecution's burden to prove that you are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And I would say in Scott's case, and I'm not saying he was innocent, you're going to get my opinion on this case at the end, but for now I'm just giving you a layout. And the fact was the media convicted Scott Peterson long before a jury ever did. So they have the dog, they have the baby coming. Christmas time rolls around. December 23rd, Laci's working at her sister's salon from about 5:45, 6 o'clock in the evening to about 8:30, 9 o'clock that night. The last time any family members talked to her, she talked to her mom that night after she got off work. This is December 23rd. That was the last time anybody had talked to or heard from Laci. They go home. Now, remember, Scott was an avid golfer. His plans that he had told everybody initially were, I'm going golfing Christmas Eve. Decides the day of or the day before that, well, the weather's bad, I'm actually going to go fishing. Had a boat, had bought a 2-day fishing license. I'm going to go fish. Scott's story was that he left that morning, takes off to go fishing 90 miles away in the Berkeley Marina. Well, a little different, and you'll kind of play into this because Scott was an avid golfer, so golfing was not, okay, that's fine, sounds normal, that's Scott. Fishing, though, not so much. Hadn't been fishing in a long time. Bought this boat, hadn't really used it, decides to go sturgeon fishing, and one of the big things that the cops said and the prosecution said is sturgeon is a huge, it's almost like a prehistoric fish. They are big. Well, it's not like you just take a trout pole. You just take any little fishing pole out there to go catch sturgeon. They said Scott didn't even have the right gear to go sturgeon fishing. And that does make sense. When I heard that he was going sturgeon fishing, I kind of was like, okay, I could see how they got up in the boat and somebody knew even a little bit about what they were talking about and looked and goes, you're not going to catch any sturgeon with this equipment. So that was interesting, but doesn't prove anything for sure. Scott says he goes fishing. Now, one part is he had stopped off at his work and got some work done for about an hour or so before he ended up driving the rest of the way to go fishing. And remember that part of it, all right? Now, I also said remember the part about Mackenzie, their dog, all right? Neighbors said they seen the dog about 10:15 to 10:45 a.m. wandering around, which is not normal. Laci would walk the dog, then the dog would go back in the backyard or in the house. It was not just out front doing nothing, wandering around. Several neighbors reported seeing the dog in the driveway. Okay. We could probably establish that was true. By the time Scott gets home that afternoon, the dog's back in the driveway. Laci's car is in the driveway, or the dog's not in the driveway. The dog's in the backyard. Laci's car is in the driveway. Says he gets home, eats, I think, some cookies, drinks some milk. I think there was some pizza mentioned. Takes a shower, gets out. He had called Laci on the way home, and you can listen to that phone call on a lot of documentaries, on a lot of episodes and TV and stuff that has been made about this case. You hear the phone call where he's, honey, hi, honey, I miss you. I'm calling to see if you went to mom's house, Nana's house, to pick XYZ up. Just call me back when you can. Okay, love you, bye. So there's that, right? Then by the time he gets out of the shower, he starts calling around, calling family members, seeing if anybody had heard from her, knocked on next door neighbors' doors. Hey, you seen Laci? Hey, you seen Laci? Nobody's seen Laci. Finally, her family calls in her disappearance at about 6 p.m. that night. When Scott talks to the police, he said he'd been fishing for sturgeon at the Berkeley Marina about 90 miles from their home. Now, quickly, the case blows up in the media, all right? One key factor. Scott becomes a prime suspect. He also refuses to take a polygraph test at the time, which is a little interesting because if you didn't kill your wife, you would say, all right, let's just get me out of the way. I want to devote all the time, all the resources to finding the person that really did this. By kind of clamming up the way he did and, refusing a polygraph test, that says a lot. Now Scott's demeanor as a whole, and people that defend Scott would say, this is just Scott, right? Scott was a quiet guy, unassuming guy. He didn't get too up. He didn't get too down. He just ran even. To the police, the no emotion thing was weird. It was sociopathic, psychopathic. Why is this guy not reacting? Why is he not upset? Why is he, He's not crying. He's not anything. When he does try to act sad, it's a little awkward. He's kind of aloof would be the best way to describe it. Then you throw in the fact that he refused the polygraph. You throw in the fact now the media's on this, and it goes from a local to a national story. And things are really starting to tighten up around Scott Peterson. Then what I would call the smoking gun or the kill shot, if you believe that he is guilty, is Amber Frey. Amber Frey was Scott's girlfriend on the side. He was having an affair with Amber Frey. She did not know he was married. She had said that his wife had passed away sometime before. He was a single guy doing his thing. You know, he's a traveling fertilizer salesman, so he's able to do some of this stuff. He's able to take Amber to some of these conferences, some of these events. He's living a double life for a while. Well, Amber, because this case is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, she sees it in the media. She sees Scott in the news, in the newspaper, under suspicion. And one of the most damning pieces of evidence that would come out was she flashed back to the date they gave was December 9th, where she says that Scott told her that he was acting sad. This is going to be my first Christmas without my wife. Amber gets sick to her stomach. How could he have known this if his wife wasn't dead December 9th, if she went missing December 24th, and she doesn't even know he's got a wife? So you can imagine her world and how that would have made her feel. So Amber goes to the police. She goes public with it. She has a press conference, which she basically comes out and says, I did not know this. Scott lied to me. I was having an affair with him. And she was fully believable. In my point of view and things I've read, she was very believable. You could tell she didn't want to be there. She did not want to be up there in front of those cameras given that information. She was embarrassed. Even though she didn't know, she was still embarrassed. I think she had a young child at the time. She was a massage therapist. Thought she met this great guy. Had a good job. Took her places. Said he loved her. Come to find out, it was all BS. So she goes to work for the police. Wearing a wire, recording phone, not wearing a wire, but letting him record her phone calls. Scott doesn't know this, okay? Does not know that Amber knows. So I want to backtrack a little bit because before her press conference, she had basically recorded phone calls where I think it's New Year's Eve. You hear that famous call where he says he's in Paris and I'm under the Eiffel Tower. And yep, I was in Brussels today. That's why I didn't have my phone. And she's selling it. She's good, knowing full well that he's lying, knowing full well that he's actually in Modesto dealing with police and family members about his missing wife. He's still pretending that he's in Paris. He's at this event in Paris celebrating New Year's Eve. This is where a lot of people, if you were on the fence about Scott Peterson, if you were still kind of like, I don't know if he did it or not, a lot of people jumped off. A lot of people said, yep, he did it. He killed her. And look at how he's acting. Look at how he can lie. Look at it. How could a normal person, how could somebody that didn't kill her do all this? And you know what? It's hard to argue that, especially the point about where he says this is going to be my first Christmas without my wife. That's almost eerie. So fast forward a couple months. By March of 2003, it had gone from a missing person to a homicide case with a $500,000 reward attached. Finally, on April 13th, 2003, the mutilated body of a full-term fetus. So basically, it was a human being. Full-term fetus was found on the shoreline of San Francisco Bay by a couple walking their dog. And the very next day, April 14th, 2003, the badly decomposed body of a woman was found a few miles north of the Berkeley Marina, where Scott said he was fishing. Laci and Connor's bodies were found about a mile apart from each other. Her corpse had no head, no limbs. And they had to confirm by DNA. Everybody kind of knew, but still DNA had to confirm it. And on April 18th, DNA did confirm it was the bodies. That very same day, April 13th, Scott Peterson was arrested in La Jolla, California. Had his hair dyed blonde, had $15,000 in cash, 4 cell phones, 2 driver's license, extra clothes, survival and camping gear. It was kind of thought by where he was going down south, more that he was actually going to Mexico. Because of the stuff he had in his car. That's what authorities thought. He was going to cross the border. His attorneys, Mark Garagos, and he actually hired high-profile attorney Mark Garagos, defended a lot of famous people. this is the guy you want defending you in court. If it's a case for your life, it's a case to determine whether you're going to be sent to death or life in prison or get out. Mark Garagos basically has said that it wasn't him running. He was still trying to work. He was still trying to maintain an income. He was still trying to lay low, so he dyed his hair because he wanted to look different. He had the cash on him because he didn't want police and the authorities tracking his spending. And he wanted to be able to move about more freely without people watching his every move. I'll leave that up to you to believe if you do or not. I will say personally, I do not believe that. I can believe maybe the dyeing of the hair, some of the money. But when you start talking about multiple driver's licenses, the passport stuff, the camping gear, you can't explain that. Why does he have camping gear in his car? Where's he going? If you didn't do this and your wife is missing, where are you going? You're not going camping. It's like, what are we doing, Scott? You're killing me, man. If you're trying to defend him, if you're his family, his friends, you're trying to defend him. Like, Scott, what the heck are we doing, man? So anyway, gets sent to prison or jail, awaiting trial. Pleads not guilty, has never admitted his guilt. I will say that. In all these years, 20 plus years, Scott Peterson has never admitted his guilt. He has told the same story every single time. High-profile attorney Mark Garagos. Trial begins June 1st, 2004. And that's how this happens end of 2002, gets arrested beginning of 2003, doesn't go to trial until the following year. So he sits in jail for about a year and a half until this case finally goes to trial. And the prosecution case was simple. Scott was tired of his life. Scott was still young. I think Laci was killed when she was 27. They were in their late 20s. Scott's looking around going, got a baby almost born, tied down with a wife. I got a new woman that I love. Instead of just getting a divorce or leaving her, prosecution says, nope, he killed her. That way there's no financial responsibility. Clean slate, fresh start. And, selfish, narcissistic, sociopathic, doesn't show any feelings, doesn't show any emotions. Why is a guy whose wife is missing, found in La Jolla, California, with his hair dyed, $15,000 in cash, driver's licenses, passports, and camping gear close to the Mexican border? That doesn't look like a grieving husband. That doesn't look like somebody that's hanging around trying to figure out what happened to his wife, Laci, and his unborn son. That sounds like somebody that's guilty, that's trying to get the heck out of Dodge and get as far away from the situation as possible. And is honestly terrified of what's coming down on his head and what he knows is the likely outcome of all of this. Like I said, divorce would cost money. You add the facts in with how he is just as a person, his demeanor, his personality. You blend that all up with a big dose of media coverage. And people basically, like I said, before any courtroom drama, there was the media. And they had fully convicted. And there's those videos of during the Scott Peterson trial, the courtroom was packed inside and outside. When the verdict was read, cheering, people breaking out of all different colors, of all different, it wasn't a race thing. Black people, white people, Hispanic people. A lot of women. You saw more so women because this was a pregnant mother, a wife, who by all accounts was a great person, a great wife, loved her family, couldn't wait to be a mom, had her whole life ahead of her, and she was brutally murdered. They also talked about how Laci's body, it's found by where Scott went fishing. There was some anchor concrete residue found in the boat at the time when they had searched this. So when they first were interviewing Scott, right? They searched the house, couldn't find anything. No evidence of a crime. Searched the truck, no evidence of a crime. They searched the boat, no evidence of a crime, but there were some spots, or they were checking things out. Then they were checking out there's these concrete remnants. Well, yeah, I made anchors. Okay, well, they believe those anchors were what Scott used to tie the bodies down, to tie Laci's body down and Connor's body down, to hopefully not have happened what did happen, which is where they, the gases in the body, and just over time they float to the surface. That's how they were discovered. And the fact that, Scott never fished, he never, he didn't even have the right gear, the 2-day fishing license, he didn't even fill out what days he was going. And authorities say, well, that's because he was trying to figure out what day he was going to kill Laci. He wasn't quite sure on when he was going to do it or how he was going to do it. Well, he knew how he was going to do it, but he wasn't sure on exactly what day. Okay, so this is the case, the prosecution pretty much presents. But there is still no evidence directly linking him. 180 witnesses over a 5-month trial. He had a juror that was replaced after they were caught doing research on the case. Foreman was removed as well for arguing with other jurors. The jury deliberated for 9 days and came back with a conviction of first-degree murder and second-degree for Connor, the unborn boy's death. Again, though, the media all over it. A lot of controversy surrounding that point. December 13, 2004, a jury deliberated for 11 hours before coming back and condemning Scott Peterson to death by lethal injection. Right away, when you have a death penalty case, there's an automatic appeal. Even if he doesn't want to file it, there's an automatic appeal filed. Boom, just like that. All right? Gets denied. But August 24th, 2020, his death sentence was overturned 7-0 because of jury issues. And there had been jury issues from the jump. All right? We're going to get into that more on... I broke this down into reasons for guilt, reasons for innocence, even on kind of a deeper level to really help you guys understand. I will give my final, what I believe happened and what I, truly believe after reading and studying this case. So again, we're going to go over reasons for guilt, his demeanor, a big part of how he was viewed by the public, how he was acting during his missing wife and unborn child's disappearance and ultimately murder. Scott, why is there no emotion? The affair with Amber Fry. Lying to her about being in Paris as you're going to these candlelight vigils for your missing wife and unborn son. Why were you in La Jolla, California? Found with all of this stuff in there. Why? The money, the driver's license, the passports, all these things indicating that you were getting the heck out of town. Why did you bring the wrong fishing gear to go fishing? You had never fished before. You hadn't been fishing in years. How do you explain some of this stuff? The remnants of the concrete, the anchors that you made. They even found, and this is a part I do not want to forget to tell you guys about, he would go out, he would rent vehicles and take random trips to the marina, right? Take random trips after all this happened, after the disappearance, after everything, after he's already being watched by police, he's going out to the marina, and they believe that's because he was trying to see if their bodies had washed up, if anything had come. So he would... when I read that, I'm not going to lie, that really made me think. You're not taking your own vehicle, you're renting vehicles to try to stay hidden, and you're going out for what reason? Well, if you're on his side, you can say, well, he's looking for his wife. He's looking because he's afraid that's, the cops are out there looking. Well, I want to help look too, but why rent a vehicle? There's just, like I said, it's a big circumstantial case, but when you put it all together, it really does make a compelling case for guilty. Now, another part, right, after the disappearance, after the death, he had pretty quickly looked into selling their home, belongings of Laci's. He had lied to, little parts of his stories would change, like when he was telling her family and anybody that would listen about his whereabouts after the murder, like things just didn't always add up, and there would be discrepancies in his stories, and it's said that, and I've watched with his mom or his mother-in-law, Laci's mom, the minute Amber Fry came out, that's when Laci's mom, she said the words, why did he have to kill her? Why did he have to kill her? That's when the whole family switched and said, okay, yep, he did it. He's guilty. Now, last part, reasons for innocence. And this is interesting because the LA Innocence Project picked this case up a couple years ago. And when they did that, this gave a ton of validity to Scott Peterson's case. They believe right away that the media convicted him before anything, that the cops had honed in on him and did not track down any other leads. There was the famous juror, they called her Strawberry Shortcake, she had the red hair, who, when she went by the name, her name was Rochelle Nice. The press had dubbed her Strawberry Shortcake. Well, she had hid the fact that she was a victim of domestic violence. So basically she was biased and had written Scott Peterson 17 or more letters after his conviction and death sentence. All right, she was on the jury that convicted him. Another big one, and this is what I first started hearing about when I first started reading back into this case, is multiple witnesses claim to have seen Laci walking the family dog around 10 a.m. If that's the case, if Laci was walking her dog around 10 a.m., then Scott Peterson did not kill his wife and unborn son, Connor. He did not do it. It was verified that he left when he said because of the timestamps of when he got to his work. All right? There were a lot of witnesses. Now, the flip side of that is eyewitness testimony isn't always reliable, especially years later. Memories fade. Things get distorted. You think you saw something when you didn't. You ever kind of heard there's that kind of phrase when you talk to like your grandpa or older people in your family, right? The stories always seem to get better as time goes on, right? Grandpa's war stories, grandpa's sports stories. I joke with my own dad about his sports accomplishments. Well, the closer he gets to 60, they always seem to get better, right? So is there a case of that where you get so enamored with the case, you kind of want to put yourself in it, right? By the way, I think I did see her walking the dog. Now you get some attention on you, police are talking to you, investigative journalists are talking to you, people that want to prove he's innocent are talking to you. So that's just something to think about. But regardless, you can't dismiss it because there were a lot of people that viewed him as innocent when this came out. Now, another big one, the day she disappeared and murdered, there was a burglary across the street from the Peterson home the same day she went missing. Scott's sister-in-law, Janie Peterson, who's now an attorney helping Scott fight his case, has said she had evidence from a man who signed an exhibit, and I'm not 100% sure what that is, but he signed an exhibit saying he'd overheard a man confess to the murder of Laci after she caught him and his partner wheeling a safe out of a house. They then dumped her body in the bay, and get this, they did it because they had seen reports that Scott was fishing that day. So basically a frame job. Now, this is backed up by the fact of a woman by the name of Diane Jackson claiming that she saw 3 men in a van on the morning of the murder in front of Peterson's home. The police countered that by saying those 3 men had been interviewed and it was determined that they were not at fault. And one of the police I see in one of the shows I watched is saying not only did they allow themselves to be interviewed, they were more than willing to come forward because they basically said, we want no part of this case. We want no part of this case. Whatever you need, we'll do it. Another fact of him possibly being innocent, like I said, the LA Innocence Project is taking this case. They don't take cases very often. And when they do, it's because they have to believe in you. They have to believe you are innocent. The last one I'll say, he has always claimed he's innocent. 20 plus years, nothing has changed in his stories. You cannot prove how Laci died, what she was killed with, any specifics of the crime. And outside of those concrete remnants from the anchors, they did not find any physical evidence, house, truck, boat, nothing. If he killed her, why isn't there any remnants? Why is there nothing found? Nothing. All the prosecution could say was that he was a bad person who cheated on his wife, lied about it, got caught, was aloof, didn't have much of a demeanor, had, what they would say sociopathic, narcissistic tendencies, and wanted a new life, was ultimately convicted of murder. After researching this, after doing the reading that I did and watching what I watched, in my humble opinion, I believe Scott Peterson is guilty of murder. I believe that there's too many coincidences. I believe there's too many factors pointing to his guilt. For me, I will be honest, there's 2 things. One, it's in La Jolla. When he's in La Jolla with all of that stuff, dye hair, fine. Money, fine. Passports, 2 driver's licenses, camping gear. Scott, what are you doing? Where are you going? The day they're discovered, you're on your way to La Jolla. And then the little things, right? Didn't have the right fishing gear. Never was a fisherman. Didn't fill out his fishing license. I've fished before. I know guys that do. Those are things that you do. If you're going fishing, you're prepared. And then the last thing for me was when I heard about the multiple trips to the bay in rental cars. Looking, circling, checking out, creeping back, looking for those bodies. That means you're thinking about it. That means you're going home at night, going to bed, can't sleep. Because what if the evidence washed up on shore? It's a very interesting case. I will bring an update. If we do get an update, which we will, they're fighting this. All this stuff takes time. All this stuff takes years. Scott's in his 50s. This has gone on for over 2 decades. But had to bring it to you guys today. If I do get an update, I will make a video for it. I believe he's guilty. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments. Seriously, I want to know what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.